If you're going through hell, keep going. Winston Churchill. And me. Especially after today. Hey, you. How's it going? How are you? It's AD Roundtree. Welcome to this, your Monday edition of the show. Yeah, your Monday. Your new day of your new week. Your clean slate. Your fresh start. A chance for you and I to move forward together into whatever it is that happens next. A chance for you to kick an entirely new work week directly where it counts. You're doing awesome. Hang in there. You got this. You are a badass. And if you need something, if there's anything I can do for you to make your Monday better, hit me up. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. At ADSXE. It's where you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ADSXE. Put it in your phone now in case you need it later. So, I guess today is really more of a life update. Thank you so much to everyone that's been supporting the podcast, especially those that have been kicking in on Patreon. That is awesome, and it really means a lot. If you want to do that, go ahead, patreon.com/ADSXE. Like you and I have said in the past, these conversations that you and I seem to be having on the podcast center mostly around mental health. I think conversations like these should be free to everyone for all time. So I'll never charge a subscription fee to the podcast, and I will never put it behind the paywall. But to those that have been contributing, patreon.com/ADSXE, thank you so very, very much. I really, really appreciate it. And, well, let's see, if you're listening to the podcast for the first time, life has taken some interesting twists and turns over the last quarter of a year. Back in November, I got a call that my father, who had lived in Kosovo for the last 15 years, where he worked for the UN and other non-governmental organizations fighting for human rights as a lawyer who specializes in Eastern European law, I got word that he'd had a medical emergency. I was told by the doctors where he'd been rushed in Pristina, Kosovo, that I would have to come there, pick him up, he'd be fit to fly in a few days, and I would get him back home to America where he could receive further treatment for a whole bunch of other things. It was sort of the perfect storm of ailments that put him in the hospital. So I took a leave of absence from my job, being on the radio on about 50 stations around the country, in particular, one called 94.5 The Buzz in Houston, where I'd been for the last 17 and a half years. It was more than a 3-day trip. There was a twist or a turn every day that made things more difficult, more complicated, more painful, surprising, all of the above for me and for my father. Until eventually, after 4 hospitals in 2 countries and crossing an international border with lights flashing in an ambulance so he could be fitted with a pacemaker that wasn't available to him in Kosovo, in Macedonia, I got him home to Los Angeles. About 2 months later, about 2 months after the initial call that he'd had an emergency and would be okay in a few days, my father passed away. And while I was overseas looking after my father, my time on your radio, if you listened to me in the past, came to an end. And, well, needless to say, with my father's life dangling by a thread in a hospital room in Kosovo, finding myself newly unemployed, things weren't looking too bright. I don't mean to sound whiny, but it is probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, and I hope it's the most difficult thing I ever have to do. And it was an exercise in waking up, trying to figure out the next right thing, trying to put one foot in front of the other. Everything, like I said, got more and more difficult, painful, and complicated at every turn. And while my dad passed away not long after I got him back to America, I was able to get him back to America so he could see my sister and his sister again, which was important. But in pretty much every single way, that something like that can be devastating, it was. All of a sudden, I found myself unemployed, without an income, with my father's hefty medical bills piling up, being forced to pay for it there in the hospital because my father was not a citizen. Trying to figure out how I was going to manage that, trying to figure out how I was going to get him back home to America. Having Serbian medical transport companies bail on me at the last moment and finding a new flight nurse to get him back to America, trying to arrange oxygen for him the entire way. It was not easy. It was not fun. It was an adventure, but it sucked. Finding myself unemployed and, well, a lot of your identity is wrapped up in your job. It's not just the hit of, gosh, I got to find a new way to eat and pay rent. This is what I did for the last 17 years. This is who I am. That was taken away. Not taken away. It was a choice that I made, that I was forced to make, that in retrospect, I was happy I made. I know I did the right thing, but it didn't make it easy. It was the lowest of the low. The most painful pain I had ever experienced. Is that a thing, a painful pain? Well, it is now. I was, I suppose, to paraphrase a guy like Winston Churchill, going through hell. And I've had people say to me, I couldn't do what you did. When I got home, I realized that there were bits and pieces that I would never get back from the Balkan regions. Parts of me that weren't returning home. I realized I had a lot to unpack. So, fortunately, my therapist, who I talked to about 10 years ago, was still available, still willing to talk to me. And he said, you've been through an awful lot. I don't know if I could have done what you did. It sucked. It was no fun. And quite frankly, I don't know if I could have done what I did. I know that doesn't make much sense, but if someone had told me, hey, AD, you are going to go to former war-torn Yugoslavia. You are going to spend time in the Balkans. You're going to go to Kosovo and then Macedonia, and you're going to deal with your father's health problems. Your father won't be able to talk or communicate or explain himself or let you know exactly what is going on with him or what is going on with him or what has been going on with him. You're going to get him from one country to another. You're going to find him a pacemaker that couldn't be delivered to Kosovo, so you're going to get in an ambulance and go to Macedonia where it can be delivered because of customs and weird international goings-on at the border. If you told me that I was going to do all this, I'd be like, I can't do that. You got to be insane. There's absolutely no way. My shrink told me most people couldn't do what you did. But if you would have told me, I would have told you. If you would have told me that was going to happen, I would have told you that there was no way. But I didn't have a choice. I had to just keep putting one foot in front of the other and do the next right thing. Eventually, I got home, where I found myself for the first time in 17 years, unemployed, not on your radio. Thankfully, enough of you had asked, so I started this podcast from my father's hospital room. First and foremost, because I didn't get to say goodbye the way I would have liked to when my job came to an end. Second of all, because I realized that these conversations that I've had with you and people like you on the radio for the last 17 years are really kind of sort of what get me through this back and forth. Well, it helps. It really, really helps. So I know I had to keep it going for my own sanity, if nothing else. And thankfully, you came along for the ride. I thank you for that. It was one of the most difficult, painful times of my life. Like I said, probably the most difficult, but I don't know if I've ever felt more loved and supported and appreciated. And like so much of the world had my back. You had my back, and I'll never forget that. But it all seemed impossible. Going to Kosovo, sounded impossible. Getting my dad to 4 different hospitals, getting him to a different country, getting him a pacemaker that couldn't be delivered to one country and another country, getting him home after one medical transport company bailed on me, hiring another one at the last minute, and getting home all seemed impossible. And then I was left with a giant hole in my life. My father had passed away. I was unemployed, wondering where I was going to go, what I was going to do, who I was. My friend Greg very wisely said, hey, there's going to come a time after the loss of a parent, there's going to come a time, if you're like me, where you start to question who the hell you are. And that happened. And it's still sort of happening. But, well, hell is not a word I would necessarily use lightly. But for good portions of the last 3 months, the last quarter of the year, I was in hell. And what do? Well, like I said, you have to keep going. There's no other choice. You have to keep putting one foot in front of the next. And, well, I suppose this is a bit of a life update. Because today, I'm talking to you from the parking lot of Hubbard Radio in St. Louis, Missouri, after having done my first morning drive shift on the legendary K-Sheet 95, the longest running rock radio station in America and indeed the world. Can't believe I got to walk into its hallowed studios and do morning radio. Something I've wanted to do for a very long time, with the legendary John U-Man Hewlett, the guy who's been on the radio station for 45 years. Man who is also, by the way, the voice of the St. Louis Cardinals. That's really cool. While I am a Mets fan, while I grew to love the Astros so much while I was in Houston. It's amazing to be in such a passionate baseball town, working with a guy who is up close and personal with one of my favorite things on earth, the sport of baseball. So here I am with a job. Not just any job, a job that I'm incredibly fortunate to have. I'm so lucky to have landed where I did. And it just came from a need to keep going. Like I said, put one foot in front of the other. I had hopes, dreams, goals, aspirations, things I wanted to do in my past life. And, well, I got to tell you, the picture I had in my mind when I started in radio looked very different than where I am now. It's something I never even would have imagined, would have considered, but it's amazing, and I am so lucky. I've been welcomed with open arms, not just by the people on the radio station, not just by the people I work with, but the people of St. Louis. And it's only day one. So lucky, so fortunate. And it reminded me of 2 of my favorite quotes ever. First and foremost, Winston-Churchill, who, like I said, was quoted as saying, "If you're going through hell, keep going." I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew I had to, whether I was in Kosovo trying to save my father's life, trying to buy him some more days so he could see family before he eventually left us. I knew I had to keep going. And when I found myself jobless directly after the death of my dad, I knew I had to keep going. I didn't know necessarily where it was headed. Nothing's for certain in this life. I had goals, I had hopes, I had dreams. I didn't know that I would get this lucky, be so fortunate to land where I have. But it reminded me of one of my other favorite quotes, one that I try to live by as often as possible. Do you remember when Conan O'Brien bailed on The Tonight Show? They messed him around with his time slot. Jay Leno left, and Well, then Jay Leno came back, and then they moved him to later, and he was starting the Tonight Show at a time where it would put him in the next day. And he's like, it's the Tonight Show. It's not the Tomorrow Show. This is not what I want. This is not what I want to do. And when he was saying his goodbyes, when he was resigning from the job that he had worked for his entire career, he said something to the effect of, nobody in this life gets exactly what they want. But if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things can happen. And as I wrap my first day on the air in St. Louis at this legendary, storied rock radio station, after having been embraced by a new city, after having been embraced by a new co-host and a new bunch of coworkers, well, I know it's true. I wanted to share that with you. Because it's not just a life update. That is true for you, for me, for all of us. Nobody gets exactly what they want. But if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things can happen. If you're going through hell, keep going. That is it for me. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. As always, this time that you and I spent together, it's the best part of my day. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do it all over again. Have a great one. Later.